Welcome to Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, a production of iHeartRadio and Grim and Mild.
Our world is full of the unexplainable. And if history is an open book, all of these amazing tales are right there on display, just waiting for us to explore. Welcome to the Cabinet of Curiosities. The most famous people from history tend to be remembered for their biggest, brightest moments. But sometimes that means we have no idea what other kinds of impacts and legacies they've left behind, or how their stories came full circle. Today, we remember someone who seemed larger than life, and the humble beginnings that set them on a life-changing path. Let's go back to August 12th of 1944. The United States was embroiled in a clandestine conflict across the English Channel, a theater of war teeming with the exotic weaponry of a new era. The Germans had unleashed their V-1 buzz bombs months earlier, making the world's first operational cruise missile. They were poised to unleash even more fantastical creations too, including the dreaded V-2 rocket and a fearsome supercannon. The V-2 rocket, an engineering marvel, stood as the precursor to today's mighty rockets and launch vehicles. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, the U.S. military delved into the realm of unmanned aircraft, a pursuit that had roots stretching back to the First World War. By the time World War II erupted, these aircrafts could be guided via radio signals, paving the way for what we now know as drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles. And in the summer of '44, the Allies embarked on a daring gambit known as Operation Aphrodite, employing radio-controlled bombers loaded with explosives. Brave Allied pilots could guide these drones toward high-value targets in Nazi-occupied territory, ejecting before impact. Amidst this whirlwind of technological innovation, a young woman named Norma Jean Doherty toiled away at Radioplane, a defense plant in Burbank, California. There, she and her fellow workers labored tirelessly, crafting remote-controlled aircraft intended to aid the Army and Navy gunners. Norma Jean's task included inspecting and spraying parachutes, much to her mother's dismay, who fretted over the impact of the job on her daughter's health and shiny locks. Yet it was during this time that fate intervened in Norma Jean's life in the most unexpected of ways. A chance encounter with Private David Conover of the Army's 1st Motion Picture Unit led her to being photographed, a snapshot captured on rare color film. Assigned to document the efforts of women in war production, Conover's task had been set by none other than Captain Ronald Reagan, a former actor and, of course, future president of the United States. As Norma Jean's image circulated, it caught the eye of Hollywood, propelling her toward a destiny far beyond the factory floor. Renaming herself Marilyn Monroe, she would carve out a place in history as one of the most iconic figures of the silver screen. Yet her connection to power and tragedy would extend beyond the glitz and glamour of Tinseltown. Marilyn Monroe's alleged affair with President John F. Kennedy in the 60s has become one of the most famous parts of her story. But this wasn't her first connection to the Kennedy family. You see, back in 1944, when the U.S. bombed the Nazi weapons complexes, a 29-year-old Navy lieutenant was struck down and killed. The pilot was Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., and he was the brother of John F. Kennedy. While Monroe and JFK's love affair remains unconfirmed, they are forever bound by the tragedies of war. The end of the world's not the most pleasant thing to think about. No one wants to imagine the death of all living things on this planet, but given the current state of the Earth's climate, constant war, and other negative factors, it's something we might want to worry about. If not for us, then for our children or our children's children. But one man became famous for his visions of the future, a future in which the world went to war twice, as well as a future that saw the demise of Hiroshima and Nagasaki due to nuclear weapons. Many have interpreted his predictions as signaling the end of the world. And his name? Nostradamus. Nostradamus was born Michel du Nostradame in France in 1503. He was a bright student, attending university at the age of 14. He later rose to prominence as a medical doctor and apothecary, searching for a cure for the plague, which claimed the lives of his wife and children in 1534. But eventually, Nostradamus found himself captivated by a topic that was growing in popularity at the time: occultism. It inspired him to write an almanac in 1550, which featured the first appearance of the name that we know him by today. The almanac became a hit, and new editions were being published every year. It also elevated Nostradamus to a position of authority when it came to predicting what lay ahead. Aristocrats and nobles started to consult him for information on their own futures, what awaited them months or years from now. Except he wasn't very good at it. For example, he often messed up his clients' readings by not calculating their biographical data correctly. Still, despite his inaccuracy as an astrologer, his questionable results didn't stop him from writing and publishing his beliefs. He collected many of them in a massive book known as the Prophecies. The Prophecies started as a collection of over 350 quatrains, all of which were based on the concept called judicial astrology. Judicial astrology predicted certain events according to the position of the Earth in relation to the stars and planets, not unlike modern astrology. But today's scholars have determined that many of these prophecies were actually just retellings of ancient biblical predictions about the end of the world. And he also borrowed from various classical historians and other authors to pad his work. In other words, many people believe that Nostradamus was about as accurate as a fortune cookie. But that hasn't stopped TV channels and documentarians from using his prophecies for the basis of their programs. In fact, it was one of these shows that convinced one entertainer to immortalize his own feelings about the end of the world in the early 1980s. It was a popular topic at the time, with the United States and the Soviet Union embroiled in a nuclear standoff. At any moment, it seemed, either country could launch their missiles and bring about the destruction of, well, everything. And so, crowded in a hotel room offering free HBO, this growing celebrity and his pals watched a documentary on Nostradamus. A man named Bobby, who was there at the time, described the experience. He said, "You could feel it in the hotel rooms. They were just glued to the TV. It was all they could talk about for the next day, the threat of annihilation and the loss of friends and family." They started imagining what they would do if they knew that their time was almost up. And the answer for all of them was to throw a massive party, to really just live it up until the end. Well, this entertainer was a musician, and the people that he had watched the documentary with were his bandmates. They were on tour promoting their latest album, but it was time to record the next one, and this band leader had been either scared or inspired, depending on how you look at it, by Nostradamus' prophecies to write his next song. He was particularly shaken by when the end of the world was supposed to strike, the last year of the 20th century. So he and his band recorded what would become one of their most beloved songs, a message to the world that Prince was going to party like it was 1999. I hope you've enjoyed today's guided tour of the Cabinet of Curiosities. Subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or learn more about the show by visiting curiositiespodcast.com. This show was created by me, Aaron Mahnke, in partnership with How Stuff Works. I make another award-winning show called Lore, which is a podcast, book series, and television show. And you can learn all about it over at theworldoflore.com. And until next time, stay curious.